And we are live.
Good morning, everyone. This is Eva Hussein from Polaron. As usual, Wednesday morning catch up. Today I have a great privilege to introduce you to someone that I've known for about maybe close to 10 years. So we started off as a client provider relationship, I guess is the way to describe it. But Aaron's come on board in January as our CEO. What we're asking him to talk about today is his journey from a client to CEO of our company. And you'll be able to see it for yourselves. But Aaron is probably one of the most hardworking people you'll ever meet. So we are very privileged to have him on board. He's very systems oriented, which is what our company needs right now, because we've been extremely busy and the growth's been incredible. So good morning, Aaron, to you. And what I'll start off with is maybe if you could tell us a bit more about what you do at Polaron and what your job is, because you work across different time zones and across different departments. And we got you on board to rein it all in and make it all better. So if you could maybe tell us what you do day to day.
No problem. And good morning. Thank you for having me. Yeah, look, it has been about 10 years, I think, since we met, and it's been an interesting journey in that last 10 years. But no, look, it's been a privilege to come on board. So day to day, my role encompasses everything from HR, operations. I've spent a lot of my focus in the first 6 months looking at the citizenship side of the business. And trying to upskill some of the systems and the processes there. I think we're in a very good shape now. I'm quite happy with the team that we've got. We've also expanded in our Polish office with our technical and research team over there. So I think that's also been quite successful. That team's quite cohesive. You know, they work really well together. And we've also obviously been on a massive hiring campaign in Australia recently. So we've put 5 roles on board. There's one more person joining next week, which is fantastic. So I think that structure that we've looked at 3 months ago is really starting to take shape now, which is fantastic.
It's really interesting. Sorry to interrupt you there, Aaron.
No,
I don't think the people that go through the journey of citizenship actually realize what it takes to deliver it, and you know, how many people work behind the scenes, and how many processes you have to have, and how many, I guess, you know, systems you have to support all of that. And I think we are very excited, not just with the fact that you have that vision, but we now have more people to be able to deliver, you know, really top class services, and we're really committed to that. You know, so that's I think that's part of your vision as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think you made a good point that the everything that happens behind the scenes can be quite intensive and takes quite a long time in some instances, depending on the documentation that we receive from the client. And what country they're from, or which ancestors that we're exploring the journey to obtain citizenship for that individual for. I know in my instance, for example, you know, you were quite hands-on with my case, which started back in 2013 and concluded in 2015, 2016. You know, my relatives had very little documentation fleeing from Europe, and yeah, I didn't appreciate until I came on board just how labor intensive and how investigative the whole process is, particularly for the team in Poland. You know, what they have to go through, and in terms of you know, balancing priorities and managing expectations, and then, you know, with different time zones, and then having to liaise with the client communication teams in Australia. But I certainly I think having that perspective as a client and then coming into the business with some of my systems ideologies, I think the way we've sort of structured things now, and I think the structure that we'll have over the next 12 months will just further improve the experience for the client.
Mm. And tell us about your grandmother, because I got to know, I've never met her, of course, because she's no longer alive, but I know that she's someone very, very special to you, because you kind of, not that she brought you up necessarily, but she was someone that has influenced you in many different ways. And I think through this journey, I certainly learned a lot more about who she was. Did you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we were very close. So when I was a child, I spent a lot of time in her care because my parents both worked 7 days a week when I was growing up. And yeah, she taught me a lot about where she came from and a lot of the traditions and customs of her family and the village that she came from, which bordered Eastern Poland, Western Ukraine. And yeah, I discovered a lot of relatives that we didn't know about. Her nuclear family is completely different to how even she recalled it. And I don't know if that was a result of the just the kind of the traumas of the war itself, or repressing memories. But yeah, so it's certainly something that brought my immediate family closer together as well, as part of sort of learning things. And I know for my father it was quite a poignant moment when we got my grandmother's birth certificate. That was quite a a monumental thing to have, because she never had it. And I think that was yeah, it was it's interesting to really kind of connect the dots, when you start learning about different relatives, and particularly my great grandparents, which I knew very little about. I got to learn a lot more about them. I found a cousin of my grandmother's who was very close with my great grandparents in Canada, and I was fortunate enough to visit him in 2018, and spent some time there. And he was a very interesting character, and yeah, he kind of again highlighted a lot more information about my family that I didn't know about.
Because the reason that journey took such a long time, I guess, is because we were starting with information that wasn't all correct or all clear. I think that's fair to say. And then we needed to be very creative about where we look, because the town that your grandmother's from, like you said, it is a border town, and therefore documentation was very difficult to find. So a lot of the time that we spent was looking for records. So once we had them, we were able to finalize your case. But looking for those, that was, I think, the biggest challenge for us. And speaking of which, what are some of the other challenges that our team encounters? I think we try to be very honest, transparent, and show people how we work. But at the end of the day, they don't really care. They just want their passport. So what I'd like you to cover maybe now, Aaron, is to tell us a bit more how we work and what we find challenging, what we struggle with, but more to the point, how we overcome those challenges, and what are some of the kind of creative ways that we deal with what we have to deal with.
Yep, no, that's a very good question. I suppose the process is very much centered, as you said, around the documentation, and depending on where the client's family are from and which side of the family tree and how many ancestors back we're looking for, and depending on which region of the country, will determine the sort of expediency and availability of the documents. So a lot of the archives, as you can appreciate, in a lot of those countries are not digitized. So they're manual archives. So, sometimes it can take 9 to 12 months before you even get a response from the archive. And I think the challenge for a lot of people is, we work with them and we sell them a solution, I say, as opposed to a product. And sometimes clients have difficulty understanding, just how arduous that process is behind the scenes. And that's been challenging in terms of balancing expectations and providing outcomes in a timely manner. So what we've been trying to do since I've come on board, working with the operations teams and the technical teams in Poland, is defining more clearer parameters with the clients when they onboard, and just explaining to them that if their relatives are from the border towns of Ukraine or Belarus, that a lot of those archives can take quite a long time to respond. And unfortunately, a lot of the archives in those areas, they're not customer service focused because, they're not, and explaining to the archives about what our process is and what we do. That's what I've been tasking Poland to do and try and build those relationships more with the archive. I think relocating our new office location in Poland to a central part, walking distance to the local archive, I think will be also beneficial to build that relationship, and also working with the government bodies and the local voivodeship institutions. I think in Poland will also help trying to build those relationships and expedite the process. And I think also having a more detailed explanation in the kickoff meetings with the clients, and outlining to them step by step what the process is, also outlines to them how long things will take, and then they understand what's involved in the process. I've found, particularly in the last 2 months, that's been quite helpful and allaying customers' fears about any sort of delays.
Yeah, because I think what you described here is one thing and one thing only, and that is the importance of communication and explaining to people, where we at, what we've done, where we're heading with all this. So we try and do it in a very structured way, but every case is essentially different. So by having that system behind the scenes that's improved, we are working towards better communication with the client so that they know, for example, very, very clearly that something taking a long time doesn't mean that they've wasted their time and money. It just means that we are working behind the scenes often. And I think one of the reasons we're doing these live sessions, and they have been so incredibly successful, and I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and said, "Oh, Citi on Facebook," is precisely that, to give people that insight into what our work involves and what processes we follow, what institutions we work with, so that they have that confidence that we never give up. Essentially, that's the main thing that I wanted to say from that. So we're not transactional. And I think that's one of the things we want to explain to people, that because something takes a long time, it just means that we are working behind the scenes most of the time. And Aaron, would you say, and I know it's a really big statement, so you might disagree with me, but would you say that getting a Polish passport changed your life?
Absolutely. I've been thinking about, what options I had based on my family background for a long time. And I think, certainly having the Polish passport or the citizenship, brings me much closer to the heritage and lineage. I think, as I said, when we talked earlier about, I was very close with my grandmother, and so that connection to the homeland is quite important to me. And when I saw an opportunity to be able to go through this process and become a citizen, I jumped at it with both feet. And it certainly, the advantage is obviously, it gives me options for travel, and I can obviously have property there, and I can vote in the election.
Oh yes,
which was which just
that was
passed.
interesting. Yes.
And it just means that it's an opportunity to to reconnect with my heritage through this process. So yes, absolutely, it changed my life in an extremely positive way.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting because when people engage us to assist them get citizenship, some of them at least don't think that it'll be a journey of discovery. And so essentially they purchase an ability, as I say, to work or study or purchase property in Europe. But it becomes a lot more than that, I guess, in that you do discover information about your families, but it brings you closer to where you belong. So through wars and displacement and trauma, and you know, you've touched on this a little bit. People had no choice. They were displaced, they were pushed out, they were kicked out, you know, all kinds of things like that. And I guess when in the days that your grandmother came to Australia, you were just meant to get on with life. There were no support services. You were meant to just integrate and somehow, get on with it. So I think hopefully what you discovered through this journey is also that connection that you talked about, and hopefully that's what other clients would find, that they're getting a sort of like a side benefit on top of the citizenship. There's a lot more to it than the piece of paper or the booklet that they get.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that we've got a lot of feedback from clients when they obtain the citizenship, or when documents are discovered and they say, wow, I didn't know this about this relative, or I didn't even know I had this relative. But similarly, in my situation with the cousin of my grandmother in Canada, I mean, he was an amazing character. He joined the partisan resistance movement against the Nazis in 1940 or 41, and he was 14 and a half.
Wow.
And there was 250 people in his regiment, and they walked from Eastern Poland all the way to Berlin. And
that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, and 20 people survived, and he was one of the 20. And then he was in an internment camp in Berlin for about 6 months, one of the liberated camps by the Americans. He had a choice to go to Australia, Canada, or the US. He chose Canada first and then Australia. He got sent to the US. And then 6 months after he arrived in the US, he became a citizen, and he got shipped off to Korea. So he fought in Korea for 3 years, and he won a Silver Star, or I can't remember the particular award
medal
that he won for bravery. Yeah, and then he wrote a book about Polaron, which is where my grandmother's from, the town, about the massacre, and he wrote a book about the war. It's all in Ukrainian, but yeah, there's whole chapters in there about my entire family and grandparents and their lineage, and yeah, so that was an amazing find to have. So he gave me a copy of that book, so I discovered a whole raft of relatives through that process, and which I never would have found if I hadn't have undertaken this process. So that was the added benefit that you talked about. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So we do have a few minutes for questions, because believe it or not, we've been talking for 20 minutes. I warned you that it's gonna fly by, but it's really interesting, Aaron. So the two questions that I had right now is how can a client support the case managers in their work? So the question is, for people that are thinking of proceeding, what are some of the steps that clients can take to help in this process?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing is obviously, and the easiest that they can help with, is just providing as much documentation as they can on the relatives in their families from either Poland or Ukraine or Belarus or wherever they may be from, that would tie them to Poland. Putting as much detail in the family tree document as well, to assist us in helping steer towards that eligibility pathway. I think the more detail, the more information that they can give us, the easier it is for us to be able to quickly interpret which eligibility pathway to go down. that's definitely that. The other thing is, yeah, understanding or us setting the expectation with them in the kickoff meetings. And I think now we're setting deliverables and sort of timeframes in terms of follow-up and communication. And the other thing is really just sometimes they just have to be patient. It can be frustrating because there's a lot of sort of excited energy at the start as part of the journey. I resonate with that. But I think the other thing is that, yeah, that just to work with us to be patient on the timings of things, because as outlined, a lot of the the timings and the deliverables from the archives are out of our hands, and we're working with them to build those relationships. But yeah, just being patient and understanding that it is a journey.
Right,
and
right.
that we're here to support them and work on it together. But sometimes sometimes some of those timings are out of our hands.
And of course, we are, I don't want to say beholden necessarily, but we do depend on what the Polish government tells us. So even after the case being submitted, sometimes we will get queries or requests for further documents. And that doesn't really go to our incompetence, I guess. It goes to the fact that the case officer in Warsaw that will look at your case will form an opinion or might have questions or might require clarification. And that in itself sometimes creates delays, because by the time they've written to us and they don't pick up the phone or email you, there's a really strict process of communication. By the time that happens, it may be several weeks, and the frustration for clients might come from the fact that they've asked for yet another thing, and we try and manage it at our end so that frustration is softened. But the reality is that it is the Polish government that's driving those queries, and they also doing their best. I'm rarely critical of the Polish government or the Polish officers there, because they are doing their absolute best. They are understaffed, overworked, and all of that. And we do have a very good relationship. So we tend not to argue with that. We tend to give them what they ask for. And that's sometimes that diplomatic conversation that goes on behind the scenes that takes a while.
No, I think that that's a good point that you touched on as well, is that basically, while the process that we go through is very similar each time, everyone's case is bespoke. So, no one case is the same. And, the Voivodeship office might pick one up and ask for, the two cases might be very, very similar, but they might ask for different things and they might ask different questions. So you're right, that's that part of it. We have no influence or control over. We put the case up based on our knowledge and expertise, but their questions or their queries may be different every time. So yeah.
Interesting. Andrea, do we have any other questions? Because I do have a couple, but I just wanted to give people an opportunity to ask them.
Yes, we do. We do have a couple of questions. So one of them is for Aaron. Have you noticed a year that is a general cutoff point in which research begins to become more difficult when researching your family history?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Sure. So have you noticed a year that is a general cutoff point in which research begins to become more difficult when researching your family history?
I wouldn't say that there's a specific year that makes it more difficult or easier. It's all aligned with the eligibility process. So there's different years and different criteria, criteria based on when your family lived in Poland, or if they left at a particular year. I could say probably Ava's better to answer that in terms of the specific of the years.
I'll step in there and say this, that anything post 1945, generally speaking, is available in Poland, although there are some exceptions, especially for towns where Aaron's grandmother came from, because it went back and forth between Ukraine and, this is before Stalin's death. It's not so much the timelines, it's more things like location. So if we are looking at Warsaw, for example, the chances are that there's very little available, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing. It also depends under which partitions the particular location was, because, for example, the Austro-Hungarian Empire has better records, generally speaking. And also if the area is now no longer in Poland, our experience is that a lot of documentation is available, but it's just hard to get. It takes time and a lot of effort. So I think when you look at the timelines of what we can get, or where the archives are, anything also I should point out that's less than 100 years old for birth certificates is available through the civil records. Anything that's over 100 years old goes to the archives. So it's the location of where certain records might be kept. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to reach out about your specific case, but generally speaking, it just really depends on where we're looking for and whether it's post-war, pre-war, what it was under the partitions or what region. It also depends on religion. So we know, for example, that Jewish records are harder to get because a lot of them were destroyed. Some records sit in churches, so it's an individual journey again. Yeah.
Thank you, Eva and Aaron. Second question will be, is Poland in any way incentivized to increase Polish citizenship?
I might jump in that one. So in the last few years, and everybody knows that President Duda has been re-elected, he has actually, and I don't get into politics, but let me say this, that he has actually, more than any other president that I know, has reached into the Polish diaspora. And he has actually made a number of statements whilst visiting different countries to the effect that he encourages people to return home. And what that means is that he wants people to reconnect with the heritage. He wants people to, come to Poland and spend money, come to Poland and settle in Poland. So some of the processes or some of the systems and legislation has been softened, I guess. It doesn't mean that our job is particularly easier, but generally speaking, there's more openness to returning to Poland. So one of the examples when I talk about legislation is something that's called Karta Polaka, which is a system of being able to return to Poland and live there. So it's a permit for 10 years at a time, which you can just renew. So that used to be available only for former USSR states. As of last June, it was expanded to the entire world. So people can now apply to that fairly easily. It takes about 30 to 60 days to get processed. And it gives you an ability to live in Poland, work in Poland, all of that. Plus, it helps you fast track the application for citizenship if you don't qualify through the CENT. So in answer to your question, I don't know about incentives, but it's certainly the climate for returning home has been amped up, and certainly the Polish government and the president of Poland has been very encouraging. All right, so what I do have one last question for you, Aaron. We've got about a minute to go, and that is, how would you encourage people? What would you say to someone that's sitting on a fence, that's sort of considering maybe going ahead but not being so sure? You've got 30 seconds, go.
I would say it's absolutely a life-changing, positive life-changing experience. It'll help you reconnect with your roots. It'll help you find out, positive aspects about your family, and it gives you the opportunity to be a European citizen. I think it ticks all the boxes as far as I'm concerned, and we offer a turnkey solution. You know, we work with the client from start to finish. You know, they're not left to sort of twist or you know, we don't sort of take them halfway and then say that's it. We support people all the way through, and I think that makes the process all the more encouraging from my perspective.
So didn't I say that Aaron's a systems-oriented guy? 10:30 precisely, we're done. Thank you so much. That was amazing. It gave me a really good overview of what it means to you, not just to get citizenship, but work with us. So
Absolutely.
I wanted to thank you very much for sharing all of that information. I think I found it really helpful, and hopefully everybody that's watched did too. Thank you, Andrea, from behind the scenes, and we see you all next week.
Thank you very much. Take care.